Built in 1884, the Chelsea Hotel is an iconic New York City landmark known for the notable artists that used to live here. People like Patti Smith, Janis Joplin, Madonna, Leonard Cohen, Leonard Bernstein all used to call it home. In the late 1970s, punk rock was on the rise, but in 1978, the hotel became the site of a mystery which still lingers to this day.
They were loners, they were quiet people. Very few people even in the hotel knew about their existence. They would come into my office about 2 o'clock every day to sign a voucher for some money. And then they would go out and wouldn't return until 2, 3 in the morning. That's why very few people knew them.
Did they ever quarrel?
No, they were really very much in love. Well, I thought so. And they were very pleasant, nice people.
But he really loved this person. I mean, you know, he'd been quoted in papers all around the world as stating it. He felt that Nancy was the woman of the world. He felt that women should be like Nancy. And he loved her more than he loved his music.
I've been with Sid ever since the first day I ever got to England. And we're partners in crime. And we have good fun.
You wipe the shit off of me.
We help each other out. You know? Okay, far away, next question. Like Sid would have died 15 deaths if I hadn't been around.
Today, police received an ambulance call at the Chelsea Hotel on West 23rd Street. In room 100, Sid Vicious was sitting on the bed near his picture. In the bathroom was the 20-year-old American girl he'd lived with for 2 years. Nancy Laura Spungen had been stabbed to death. Police say a collapsible hunting knife lay nearby.
For 3 months, he'd been asking me to buy him this knife that Dee Ramone gave me. Sort of like the best street knife, just 007s.
Yeah.
Butt knife that you carry in the back. So I took Sid and Nancy up that afternoon to get some knives in Times Square. They each bought one. And the difference between the two is they have leather thongs in it. I took Sid's out and showed him how to carry it. Nancy kept hers in. And we went back to the hotel.
I know for a fact there are people who went into that room that night that Nancy died. And when they told their stories years later, they said, talk about a shock when we woke up the next morning and Nancy was dead. When we left the Chelsea that night, we thought we were looking at the late Sid Vicious.
You write about Sid Vicious, and you do have a different take on him than one would. You see him as just this kind of confused,
gangly, stupid fashion victim. Yes.
Yeah.
But he was one of my best mates, and that's how I can say that, because I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. You say you have a little bit of guilt about bringing him into the group, do you?
Yes, because it destroyed him, really. His ego couldn't cope with it, and his head just exploded. Well, these things happen.
Sid and Nancy have become an anti-Romeo and Juliet. The tragic end of their relationship and their lives still hold many questions 40 years later.
Ah, dear Juliet, why art thou yet so fair? Shall I believe that unsubstantial death is amorous? For fear of that, I will stay with thee, and never from this place of dim night depart again. Here I will remain, with worms that are thy chambermaids. Oh, here will I set up my everlasting rest, and shake the yoke of inauspicious stars. From this world wearied flesh, eyes look your last, arms take your last embrace, and lips, oh, the doors of breath, seal with a righteous kiss. Come, bitter conduct, come, unsavory guide. Thou desperate pilot, now at once run on. The dashing rocks thy seasick weary bark. Here's to my love, drinking poison. O true apothecary! Thy drugs are quick. Thus, with a kiss, I die. Oh. Oh. Romeo? Romeo? Wherefore art thou, Romeo? What's this? A cup closed in my true love's hand? Poison, I see, hath been his timeless end. O churl, drunk all, and left no friendly drop to help me after. I will kiss thy lips, haply some poison yet doth hang on them. To make me die with a restorative, thy lips are warm. Yea, noise, then I'll be brief. O happy dagger, this is thy sheath, there rust, and let me die. Cut. Sobers? Sobers? Wherefore art thou sobers? Arguably one of the greatest tragedies ever written in human history, William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet embodies a story of raw, true, authentic love and emotion, pure dedication to a partner, and ultimately tragedy. The tragic miscommunication that led to Romeo taking his own life and Juliet using a dagger on hers. It's poetic, it's confusing, and honestly it reminds me a lot of Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen. Forbidden love that runs so deep that neither one could live without the other. And even weirder, Nancy went out the exact same way as Juliet. And if you think about it, Sid went out the same way as Romeo. Poison. But what if the story of Sid and Nancy was even darker than we've been led to believe? What if we're not being told the full story? Well, the stage is set, and we've got to take a quick trip down to Sid and Nancy's room, room 100, at the Chelsea Hotel.
Let's go.
All right, welcome back to Sobering Stories with me, DJ Petrovsky. If this is your first time here, I just wanted to let you know that the management staff has told me to let you guys know that the last one to hit the subscribe button is a rotten egg. Ha! If you're a returning viewer, sup sobers, you're a good egg. Real quick business item for today, and that is just me letting you know that if you haven't watched Nancy Spungen Part 1, and Sid Vicious Part 2, then, well, you're missing out. So I would go back, watch those, then come back here, and YouTube will save the spot right here, and then you can pick up right where you left off. Or you could go back and rewatch that rendition of Romeo and Juliet. Totally your call. Those episodes are going to give you more of the backstory, more understanding, a little bit more empathy for who Nancy and Sid actually were, where they came from, their upbringing, and essentially why they turned out the way that they did. And even more than that, why the two of them latched onto each other so hard. Today, we are returning to the Chelsea Hotel, which is where we left off with our episode last week with Sid Vicious. Nancy and Sid had just gotten back from their trip visiting Nancy's parents in Philadelphia. They were coming back home to New York so that they could continue working on Sid's solo career. And Nancy was standing in, acting, I guess being Sid's manager.
Have a good night. Hello, you're live. We have 3 lines if you want to get in. Yes.
I'm waiting to talk to him.
You are.
I am?
Yes, dear.
Hello?
What's your first name?
Hello?
It's me, darling. You got to listen to your television set and speak into your telephone.
I'm listening to the TV right now.
Okay, so talk to me.
Should I turn the volume down?
Just talk to me, love. We're on the air. You and I.
Hello?
Yes.
Steve?
Ephraim.
Steve?
Later. Hello, you're live. You're Sid's manager, correct?
Yeah.
What kind of role do you play in this?
In what?
What's your job? What have you been doing? in this? I mean, you're part of, he's on stage performing, but you're just as much an active part of the career as he is. What's your job? Yeah. What do you do?
Managing.
What is that? Many people out in our audience don't have any idea what a manager does.
I getting gigs.
Hey man, not everybody's in the record business. You know?
I'm his liaison to the record company.
Have you been able to sell him now?
He's got 4 record contracts. I don't have to sell him. I mean, I arrange recording, I arrange gigs, I arrange the publicity, I talk to the club owners, to the people at the record company, to the people in newspapers, magazines, things like that.
Now, Sid was seeing some mild success in his solo career at this point because he had that really successful cover of My Way, where he very goofily impersonates Frank Sinatra and sings the song and then kind of turns it into a punk anthem. And then he also had an album that came out called Sid Sings, which was doing fairly well. I mean, it wasn't a huge hit, but he was still riding off the popularity that he had from being in the Sex Pistols. Upon their return after visiting Nancy's parents, the two of them go back to their original room at the Chelsea Hotel, which is located on one of the upper levels. At some point, they light their mattress on fire. God knows how that could have happened.
Oh! Sid, damn you! Fuck!
Yeah. And because of this, they have to move them out of that room and into a different room. And apparently there's a floor of this hotel that's considered the junkie floor, the junkie level. And that is, of course, the first level, so that the management and the owner can keep better track of the people living on that level. The people that need a little bit more attention, a little bit extra care, people like Sid and Nancy. So this is when they move them down to room 100 at the Chelsea Hotel. Now, this is just like a side note. This has nothing to do with anything. This is just me coming at you guys with some personal stuff. I really hate the term junkie. Like, I really don't like it. I don't like what it implies. I already feel like there's this intense struggle for people who live in addiction or have been through an addiction, even people who are sober. There's so many connotations and judgments behind those different labels, essentially. But when you start calling somebody a junkie, it's so dehumanizing. It's almost like looking at someone as if they're not human. They're another type of person. They're not even considered a person at this point. They're just a junkie. And you hear that over and over. We heard it tons with the Kurt Cobain case. We hear it tons with this case. And honestly, it was just something that happened during that time period. There was a lot of people that you would consider to be junkies. But I just don't like the terminology. I prefer calling people addicts because, well, that's what you are. You're an addict. You're addicted to something. But that doesn't necessarily make any sort of judgment about you. It doesn't mean anything about your character. It simply just means that you have an addiction struggle. So I try not to use the term junkie because it makes me uncomfortable. And like I said, there's already this intense stigma that people who are addicts are somehow less human than everybody else because they struggle with an addiction. I'm trying to fight that mentality and philosophy and trying to reformat how people see addiction. So that's neither here nor there, but you'll notice when people refer to junkies, it's always in such a very less than me kind of a way. So I don't know. I just wanted to mention that. Now, life in room 100 for Sid and Nancy was far from glamorous. They would spend most of their time getting high, laying around, watching TV, getting into little fights with each other, smoking cigs, just, I don't know, wasting away essentially. Sid would do some solo gigs at Max's Kansas City, and that was a good way for him to make some money here and there. Nancy was turning tricks, trying to make money so that they could support their habits, but this was just a revolving door of dealers and addicts and just, I don't even know. It sounds awful. I would never want to live there like that, but this is what was going on. In May of 1978, Nancy had actually called her mom, Deborah, and let her know that she was having some weird health issues, and she actually had to get rushed to the hospital. And turns out she had a pilonidal cyst. Now, this is like a fluid-filled sac that's in your spine close to your butt, and I guess if it gets infected, it can be extremely painful, and that's exactly what was happening with Nancy. She was having a hard time sitting down. She was just experiencing tons of pain. Obviously had to go into the hospital. Her mom already knew that this was likely the case because apparently this was something that she's had since birth. It was just something that she'd known, and she was always worried that it might turn into some sort of abscess if it got infected. It seems like this health scare and then her visit with her family during that summer kind of led them to want to sober up, get clean finally. Sid and Nancy got onto a methadone program and were working to try and get off of the black tar, but unfortunately it did not seem like they were having much success. Instead, like we mentioned last week, they were just using methadone, tons of different pills, drinking, black tar, pretty much anything they could get their hands on, just sinking as deep as possible into this addiction. Probably didn't help that they were hanging out at the Chelsea Hotel either. Then on October 8th of 1978, Nancy called her mom again, and she was letting her know that she thought she had something really wrong going on with her kidneys. And she was asking her mom, like, yo, what do I do for this? Like, I'm not really sure what to do, but we're hoping you can send me some money so I can go see the doctor. And Deborah's like, you know the deal. I'm not going to send you any money. She doesn't send them money. She will pay for things. She'll pay for their rent. She'll pay for the doctor visit, but she's not going to just send them straight cash for obvious reasons. So then Sid grabs the phone and starts berating Deborah, saying, this is your daughter's health. Her health should come first. You need to send us $3,000 right now. Deborah's like, look, Sid, put Nancy back on the phone. And he's like, no, I'm not putting her back on the phone. You need to take care of your daughter. Her health should come first. And she's like, I know. That's why I'm offering to pay for the doctor's visit. If that's what the issue is, if she needs to go to the doctor, I said I'd pay for the doctor's visit and anything that she needs. And he's like, no, you're not understanding. You need to send us $3,000 right now. And he's just losing it on the phone. So Deborah finally says, like, Sid, if you're not going to calm down, I'm hanging up the phone, which is the same thing my girl always says to me. But anyways, he doesn't calm down. And of course, Deborah hangs up the phone. Deborah and Frank end up going out to dinner. When they finally return, apparently the phone has been ringing off the hook this entire time. So finally, she answers the phone when they get back from dinner, and it's Nancy. So Deborah asks Nancy, like, are you serious? Are you really experiencing these issues with your kidney? Do you really need to go see a doctor? And she's like, yeah, Mom, I think something's really wrong. I'm not really sure what it is, and I'm not even sure what doctor I need to go see. Like, what doctor do you go see for your kidneys? And her mom's like, you gotta go see a urologist. And if you want, I can make some calls and figure out a good place for you to go see. And they have this really pleasant conversation where she talks to her mom. She sounds really clear-headed. She sounds a little bit worried and a little bit scared. And she also seems like she's ready to turn a corner. She asked Deborah for the name of this rehab center that a friend of the family actually went to because she wants to get her and Sid checked into it. They really want to turn their life around and get clean for the first time ever. And then she asked Deborah to pass along a message to her grandma and her dad. Please just tell them that I love them and give them my best. Which is fairly unusual, is what Deborah says. She was a little bit sad because she didn't say anything to Deborah, like, I love you too, Mom, and I really care about you, and thanks for talking to me and helping me. But she doesn't say any of that, and so Deborah's like, okay, well, and they're about to get off the phone, and she's a little upset about it. But right before she's about to hang up the phone, as she's in the act of pushing the hang up button, she hears Nancy yell through the phone, I love you, Mommy.
Nancy had called me on the Sunday before she died in October, just a little over 5 years ago. She was in New York by then with Sid. It was after the famous visit at our house. She seemed quite different. I know she was on methadone. What else she was taking, I don't know, but I'm sure she was taking other types of drugs. But she was very clear. And it was the first conversation, I think, that we'd had in 3, maybe 4 years in which there was actual communication. She heard me, she listened, she responded. And it was kind of, I guess you'd say it was a rather chilling call. She went through a number of things. One, she asked me to find out about a particular drug rehab center that a neighbor of ours had gone to. She said that she and Sid would like to go. They both needed to get off drugs. She said she was as low as she could get. And I said, Nancy, I've always told you that I am here for you if that ever happens. She said, I think soon you're going to find me on your doorstep. And she had mentioned something about the fact that Sid was very upset and that he had been hitting her. And this upset me very much. But I wasn't quite sure how much truth there was in it. And indeed, if there was, what could I do about it? She specifically asked for her father and her grandmother, with whom she had not, by her own choice, had much communication over the last few years. And she specifically expressed her love for them and asked me to deliver these words to her grandmother and to her father. And when we finished the phone call, I had already put the phone down, or was in the act of doing so, when I heard her yell, "I love you, Mommy." At that time, I said that was a very scary phone call. It was as if she were saying goodbye.
This would be the last conversation that Deborah ever has with her daughter. Around this same time frame, because Sid and Nancy were trying to get off of the black tar and were going through this methadone program, they would have to go down to the methadone clinics, obviously daily or weekly, I'm not really sure, so that they could get their methadone and be able to take that and not feel sick all day. And when Sid would go down to these methadone clinics, he would experience all kinds of physical altercations, tons of trouble. He would just get bullied in these lines waiting for his methadone pickups, basically. It was really starting to frustrate him, and he was looking for something to protect himself. According to Steve Dior, he says that everybody at that time was getting knives to protect themselves. Things were getting crazy. People were scared, especially in that drug scene. There was a lot of unpredictability, and it just made sense to have something to protect yourself. One of Sid's really close friends, the lead singer of the Dead Boys, Steve Bators, he had this really cool 007 hunting knife, and Sid really wanted to get one for himself. It was a nice big knife. He just thought it'd be a good option for protection. So Steve takes Nancy and Sid up to Times Square. They look around at different knives. Sid ends up buying one of those 007 hunting knives. And then Nancy purchases a different kind of a knife called a Jaguar K11 hunting knife. Apparently there's like a little Jaguar printed on the handle of the knife. Fast forward to October 11th, 1978. Sid and Nancy are looking to have, I guess, what they would consider to be a party in their hotel room. And they're trying to get a bunch of different pills and different drugs because currently they're not doing the black tar. So they're probably withdrawing, and they're looking to get anything and everything they can to keep them from wanting to do the black tar. So they're calling up all these different dealers, visiting all these different people within the hotel, trying to score different drugs. At 9:45 p.m., Sid and Nancy head down to room 119, which is where Kathy O'Rourke and Neon Leon are staying. They're scrounging around trying to find different drugs, and they're asking if Neon Leon can hook them up with anything or knows of anybody that has something. What they're looking for is Dilaudids and some syringes. They already had a bunch of Tuinal pills, and they were likely shooting them up. And they were just looking to get some other pills because that wasn't quite doing it for them. While they're hanging out with Neon Leon, they're talking about how they just don't look as good as they used to. They're reliving the glory days. They're talking about how amazing they used to look versus how they look now. And they just seem depressed, according to Neon Leon. One of the weirdest parts about this interaction is that Sid brings down 2 of his gold records, as well as his notorious leather jacket that is literally like iconic. It's his leather jacket that everybody knows him for. He takes these items down to Neon Leon's room and leaves them with him and says to take care of these things. Kind of foreshadowy and kind of ominous, but regardless, it's really weird. After a couple hours, around midnight, they decide to leave room 119 and head back to their own room. They hang out there for a couple of hours, and then around 2:30 a.m., they hit up one of their known dealer friends named Rocket's Red Glare. His real name is Michael Mora, and they let him know that they're looking for some Dilaudid pills, a lot of them, and they also want to get some syringes from him. According to Neon Leon and his manager, Skip Wayne, they said they saw Sid and Nancy down in the hotel lobby just after 3 o'clock in the morning. So they were spotted by other people, they were seen in the lobby. Everything seemed fairly normal. Likely they were just waiting for Rocket's Red Glare to get there, but who really knows? Now, Rockets shows up at about 3:15 at the hotel. There's a couple of different stories about what actually happened here. I've got some reports saying that he did in fact sell them Dilaudid pills and some Tuinals, but I've got other reports saying that he didn't sell them anything because he didn't have anything, and that he just came over so that he could, quote-unquote, comfort them. I guess that doesn't make any sense. You're going to drive all the way over there just to comfort them because they're jonesing, I guess? I don't really get it. So I'm more likely inclined to believe that he did in fact bring over some Dilaudid pills because that's what they wanted, and likely he sold them to them. And the next day, he was supposed to come back with more pills because apparently Nancy had paid him more than what he actually gave them, with the expectation he would be back in the morning with more pills. Now at this point, Sid must have taken way too many Tuinals. He says he took 30 Tuinal pills, and he was out cold. Rocket's Red Glare even recalls that when he went in there and was supposedly selling these pills to Nancy and Sid, Sid was passed out on the bed, face down. While Rockets was still in the room, Sid still passed out on the bed. Nancy makes a phone call to Neon Leon asking him if he has any of the devil's lettuce. Not really sure why, but she just calls and asks if he has a joint or something. He tells her that he doesn't, but if he finds any, he'll let her know. He talks about hearing another man's voice in the background. So we can only assume that this man's voice is Rocket's Red Glare because he says he left at 5 a.m. At about 4:15 in the morning, there's some really loud knocking, really kind of pounding on Neon Leon's door. Him and this girl Kelly are in the room, but they decide we're not answering the door, especially if it's Nancy. I don't want to deal with that right now. At about 5 a.m., Rockets decides that he's finally going to leave. He heads down to the lobby, and I guess he has to make a phone call before he goes, so he stops by the front desk, and he's making a phone call. While he's doing this, another known dealer to Sid and Nancy, I guess his name is Steven, he makes his way into the hotel lobby, and he is a known Quaalude and Tuinal dealer for the couple, so he assumes that this guy is also headed up to Sid and Nancy's room. Now this next part, I don't know how valid this really is, but this is the report. At 5 a.m., the same time that Rockets left the apartment or the hotel room, Sid must have woken up because Rockets says that he was passed out cold the entire time he was there. The resident in room 228 called the hotel front desk saying, "There's somebody pounding on my door, and I would really like for you guys to come deal with this, make them stop." So they dispatched the night bellhop, his name's Kenny, up to room 228 to figure out what the H is going on up here. According to Kenny, he bumps into Sid Vicious, who is pounding on the door. He asks him to stop. Sid refuses to stop, and then apparently they get into a physical altercation, in which case Kenny says that he essentially demolishes Sid, beats him up so bad that he's bleeding all over his face, and he essentially looks like he just got the kicked out of him. The reason I don't necessarily believe this story is because nobody else corroborates it. Nobody else talks about Sid being awake at all. Everybody says that Sid Vicious was unconscious literally up until 9 a.m. And this was even confirmed by toxicology reports and medical examinations, saying that Sid would have definitely been out cold up until about 9 a.m. based on the amount of drugs that he took. And then if we look at this mugshot photo, which would be from that exact same day, Sid does not look like he got the kicked out of him. And at no point in what happens after this does Sid ever clean himself up or make himself presentable, not look like he got the kicked out of him. I guess, I don't know. So that's why I have a hard time accepting this report from the hotel staff at face value. At 5:30 a.m., a resident of the hotel who wants to be unidentified, does not want their name to be shared, says that Sid randomly showed up in their hotel room dripping with blood. Yet again, not sure if I believe this, because why wouldn't you call the police or say something, anything to anybody, or even call an ambulance if it was Sid that literally got the kicked out of him and now he's bleeding all over the place? Probably needs some medical help. You're not going to call to help him out? What? So I don't know if I necessarily believe that one either. Then at just about 7:30 in the morning, the neighbor to Sid and Nancy in room 102 at the Chelsea Hotel, her name's Vera Mendelson, she recalls hearing a woman who sounded like she was alone, moaning. She said it didn't sound like she was with anybody else. There was no arguing or talking or fighting. And what she says about it is that it frightened her. So that leads me to believe that it wasn't some sort of sexual moaning. It was maybe like a moaning like somebody was hurt or not doing well for some reason or another. She doesn't say how long these moans go on, but she says that once they stopped, that she just went back to sleep. So I'd imagine it wasn't too terribly long, probably maybe like 5 or 10 minutes of this. And then once it was done, she probably stayed up listening for a little bit and then was like, okay, I'm going back to bed. Now this next part I found to be very crucial. At 9:30 a.m., the hotel staff receive a phone call from outside of the hotel, not from one of the internal hotel phones that you can dial the front desk. This caller, who's unidentified, it's a man's voice, says that there's trouble in room 100 and asks that they go check it out, send somebody up there right away. So they send this new bellhop who took over for the morning, his name's Charles, they send him up to room 100 to figure out what the H is going on here. Not very long after that, the front desk receives another phone call from inside the hotel, from room 100, from Sid Vicious. And what he says is that someone's sick up here, they need help, please send someone. The bellhop obviously lets the front desk know, like, hey, we've got a situation. I just found a young lady with a knife wound to her stomach. We're going to need to call an ambulance. Now this happens sometime between 10 and 10:30 in the morning. Around 10:30 is when one of the residents in room 105, he's one of Sid's neighbors, he's returning home from work and he sees Sid walking down the hallway back to his room as if he just returned to the hotel. Ambulance finally arrives at about 10:45 in the morning. There they find an unresponsive Nancy Spungen. It looks like she has bled out for a number of hours. And unfortunately, she is no longer with us. There is tons of blood all over the bed where Sid was laying. There's a bloody handprint on the bed. And then there's a trail of blood that leads all the way into the bathroom where Nancy was ultimately laying underneath the sink next to the toilet. According to the official police report, Sid was passed out from the hours of 3 a.m. until 9 a.m. So he was out. But we have all these other reports of people saying that he was walking around the hotel, causing trouble, getting beat up, pounding on doors, and all this other shit. It doesn't make much sense to me when we have an official police report saying that Sid was officially passed out until 9 a.m. Now, because Sid had been playing numerous smaller gigs at Max's Kansas City, and he was getting royalties now from his performance of My Way, they actually got quite a bit of money sent to him in October of 1978. They got paid $28,000 for all of Sid's earnings from all of these different things he was doing. And they were stoked. This is why they decided to throw a party, and they were looking for as many drugs as they could possibly score. They were trying to spend like $1,400 on drugs that night. A little after 11 a.m., Sid is pulled into the hallway by police officers, and they're beginning to question him to figure out, the H happened, bro. We've got Sergeant Thomas Kilroy, as well as Detective Gerald Thomas. I know, a lot of Thomas stuff going on. But I was able to read through the testimony from Detective Gerald Thomas at the grand jury indictment of Sid Vicious, and you get to see everything that he questioned Sid on and exactly how this whole interrogation went down. Detective Thomas starts by asking him some pretty basic questions like, do you know who she is? Do you live here? How long have you lived here? And he's like, yeah, I know who she is. It's Nancy. We've been here about 2 or 3 weeks. And then he just asks him outright, like, what happened? Do you know what happened to her? Were you here all night? And Sid says, yeah, I was here all night, but I have no idea what happened. Detective Thomas is not buying it. Now, Detective Thomas is going to talk to Sid a total of 3 separate times. He calls it Discussion 1A, Discussion 1B, and then Discussion 2. So these are 3 separate occasions, all on the same day, that Detective Thomas is going to question Sid about what happened. Each time he questions him, his story seems to change. Now, I'm not sure about you guys, but I watch tons of true crime. I watch a lot of interrogation videos, and specifically, I've seen tons of false confession videos. And this whole interrogation by Detective Thomas made me feel like this was 100% false confession material. For one, he talks to him multiple times and his story continues to change each time based on the amount of pressure applied by Detective Thomas. Also, Sid is still high out of his mind. He took tons of pills the night before and he still seems like he's super out of it. And I thought maybe there was some sort of laws against questioning people when they're under the influence of something, but there's not. There's really no laws against cops questioning you while you're super intoxicated. So you may be blackout drunk and do something or say something completely incriminating, and that is fully legal. Now, of course, in court, you can bring it up and argue that, well, I was intoxicated, so you can't trust that as reliable. And then I was like, well, I mean, I guess it makes sense because it would be the most fresh to question the person at the time, but they're not clear-headed enough to know what's going on. And that's exactly the case with Sid. He seems so dazed and confused and traumatized because he just realized that the love of his life is dead. Detective Thomas then asks Sid, like, okay, fine, well then what happened last night? Like, what's the whole situation here? And Sid tells him that they were hanging out last night. The last thing he really remembers is Nancy was sitting on the edge of the bed that he was sleeping on, and she was flicking her Jaguar K11 knife. Sid says he went to sleep about 1 a.m., and then he didn't wake up until 10 a.m. that same day. Now, this part kind of confused me, but Sid tells the officer when he woke up, he thought that he had pissed the bed because he was all wet. Once he realized what was actually going on, he noticed that it was actually blood. Now, maybe he just assumed that it was his blood. Maybe he had no idea what was going on. Maybe he didn't even think about it. I don't know. But he says that he gets up, he walks over and sees Nancy in the bathroom. He says she was breathing all right and she wasn't bleeding. So he proceeded to walk out the door and headed to the methadone clinic so that he could grab their methadone for the day. And then he made his way back to the hotel, at which point he sees Nancy bleeding in the bathroom. And that's when he realizes that he needs to call for some help. This is when he phones down to the front desk of the hotel. And then finally, police and ambulance services are dispatched, which sets this entire thing in motion. Now, Detective Thomas is like, wait, what? Seriously? You saw that your girlfriend was laying in the bathroom and you decided to go to the methadone clinic anyways? And Sid was like, yeah, well, I mean, she seemed fine. So I went to the methadone clinic and then I came back, noticed she was bleeding. So I grabbed the knife, I washed it off, and then I tried to clean up all the blood off of Nancy by using a towel. And the officer is like, no, there's no way that you did that. You didn't clean up any blood off of her because she is completely covered. And then Sid's like, no, you didn't see the towel that I was using that's covered in it. So this is also really strange. Sid also says that he placed the knife back on the bed, but in the photos of the crime scene, the knife is clearly found on the suitcase. What gives? But the fact remains, the knife was in fact completely wiped clean. No fingerprints, no blood, no nothing. The knife in question is a Jaguar K11 knife, which just so happens to be Nancy's knife, not Sid's knife. Detective Thomas also testifies that not only did they find that knife sitting on a suitcase in the room, but they also found a second knife. It was a 007 hunting knife, just like the one that Stiv Bators had. That knife was actually on the nightstand right next to the bed that Sid was sleeping on. That would have been Sid's knife. The reason this fact is important is because if Sid was going to have done that, I would imagine he would probably have used his own knife. He wouldn't have used Nancy's knife. So I don't know. It is very possible that maybe they were in an argument or a fight and then she pulled the knife on him, or he grabbed her knife that was close by or closer or in her hand, something, and used that on her. That's very possible. But it is kind of strange that it was Nancy's knife and not Sid's knife. Also that there's no fingerprints or blood on it. And the fact that Sid would wake up, notice that Nancy's in that state, and then proceed to just clean the knife first, and then just try and clean her off. It doesn't make any sense. Now, another fact that Detective Thomas brings up that I haven't seen mentioned anywhere, including hotel records stating that there were phone calls made, they notate the phone call made from outside of the hotel, and then they also notate the phone call made from Sid from inside the hotel. But then during this interrogation, Sid says that he called down a second time to the front desk after he couldn't clean Nancy up and said, please, you guys need to come. You need to hurry. She's seriously not doing well. But there's no mention of this second phone call from anybody. So it makes you wonder if any of this testimony, if any of this stuff that Sid is saying is truthful. Detective Thomas continues to pry, asking if they got into an argument, if they got into a fight, if anything happened. And Sid says, no, we didn't get into an argument, nothing happened. Then Detective Thomas says, well, did you stab her? And he says, no, I would never do that. I would never do that. I can't believe my baby's dead. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? He's like freaking out. He's losing it. And understandably so. Detective Thomas continues to push and say, you guys must have had an argument. Something must have happened. You must have had an argument last night. And finally Sid says, yes, we did have an argument. Then he says, well, if you had an argument, you must have put your hands on her. But Sid starts losing it. So Detective Thomas takes a break, leaves for a few minutes, then decides to come back and try his round of questioning again. He starts pressuring Sid, asking him, like, what were you arguing about? Did you hit her? Did you hit her or something when you were arguing? And Sid's like, I don't know. I don't remember. Like, no, I didn't hit her. We weren't arguing. I don't really remember. But then after he admitted to arguing with her, the cop keeps pushing him and saying, okay, well, when you were arguing, you must have hit her. And finally, Sid says, yeah, I did hit her. I hit her on the top of the head and she fell into the bed. And the cop's like, oh, so you hit her really hard? And he's like, no, I didn't hit her that hard. And at this point, that was not very uncommon for Sid and Nancy. They were both being physical with each other, but Sid was being especially violent to Nancy. She showed up multiple different places with bruises all over her face. She had her nose broken, and her ear was literally halfway ripped off. She had to have it sewn back on, according to her mom. Sid also hit her in the head with his bass, and I think that's what actually broke her nose. So there is a track record of Sid being violent with Nancy, so the fact that he hit her on the head is not too surprising. Plus, you have to remember, all of these guys are essentially withdrawing from the black tar because they can't have it right now. Though they are substituting with other stuff, I'm sure that they are a little bit angsty and edgy because of that. Then Detective Thomas starts asking him what drugs they were doing the night before, and Sid says they weren't doing any. And then the officer's like, come on, man, I saw the paraphernalia in the hotel room. I know you guys were doing something. Quit lying. Tell me what you guys were doing. Finally, Sid says, yes, we were doing 2-in-alls. And he asks him how many he took. And there's reports all over the place saying that Sid took 30 2-in-all pills. Now, I'm not sure where that number is coming from. I'm not sure exactly who started that. But in this interview with Detective Thomas, Sid says he took 4. That's not to say that that's not that many. That's actually 3 more than he should have taken. The recommended dose is taking 1. It's a really heavy barbiturate. I think it's used for like sleep. It's used to really put you out. So taking 4 of those, that's going to put you out. Like you're gonna go to sleep. That's just what's gonna happen. So to think that Sid was asleep from 1 a.m. to 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. is not too outlandish. He probably was out cold. And according to all of the people that were in and out of the room that night, every single one of them said Sid was passed out, face down, out cold. Didn't say anything. So the detective asks him again, like, what happened then? Did you stab her? Did you do this? And Sid's like, no, I didn't do this. I don't know what happened. I have no idea. And he just keeps repeating, like, I don't know. I was asleep. I have no idea. And the officer's not backing down. He's like, no, quit lying to me. I know that you did this. I know you did something. But eventually, after being pressured enough times and being essentially told that he's lying over and over and over when maybe he was in fact telling the truth, eventually Sid finally just changes his story, almost like he's just sick of being questioned. And if you can imagine, he's now super out of it, kind of coming down off of whatever he was on, and likely just not in an emotional state to be able to handle a cop berating him about stuff he has no memory of. Maybe he did just get sick of it and admit to the crime. So finally he says, yeah, I did it, and I stabbed her, and I love her, but sometimes she's really mean to me. But then not very long after that, the detective's asking him, like, why'd you do it? How'd you do it exactly? And he's like, I don't know. She must have rolled over onto the knife or fell onto it or something. Like, I don't know what happened. So he kind of reverts back to his original story. And this would be in conversation 2, so that'd be essentially the third conversation that this detective had with Sid Vicious. And this was over the course of a few hours. In my eyes, it seems like the cops on this case saw it as two junkies, unfortunately in a stupid junkie-like situation, and they already had their guy. I mean, they had all the evidence they needed right there. They've got Sid literally asleep in the room right next to where it all happened. So, open and closed case. Like, they were just trying to get a confession out of Sid so that they didn't have to do any real police work. Once they get this confession, though, even though Sid recants and says he doesn't know what happened, says he would never do that to her, they arrest Sid and they take him down to the police station. At this point, Sid is arrested, taken to the station, booked in, and charged with second-degree murder of Nancy Spungen. Now, just like with the Kurt Cobain case, there were so many people going in and out of that hotel room that it's hard to believe that nobody saw what happened. In the documentary by Alan Parker called Who Killed Nancy, he interviews quite a few people that were at the hotel that night that actually spent time in the hotel room. And we get a clearer picture of who was actually going in and out of this room and some of our possible suspects. This guy's name is Victor Colicchio, and he's actually a reverend now. Victor says mostly the same thing as Rocket's Red Glare and anybody else that had seen Sid that night.
Leon wanted to bring him to the room to get the brownie points, but Kelly insisted that I go with her. It was just Sid there that I remember, Nancy. She gave us the money. We left. It was, I'd say, between 4 and 5 that they called up. Kelly came down to the room. By the time I got dressed and got down to the room, we knocked on the door. Sid was out of it. And there was a guy in the room, I would say Snaky, Spidey, Skippy. I just remembered and, an E in the name. I didn't pay attention. And he was there, and they already had enough, and Sid was passed out, and that was the last time that I saw either one of them.
He says that when he went into the room, he was there to sell him some Tuinals and some Quaalude pills, and when he walked in, Sid was out cold, and he was laying face down on the bed, and he was dealing mostly with Nancy. And Victor was there with a girl named Kelly, who was also hanging out with Neon Leon that night. They had all gone down to Sid and Nancy's room so that they could sell them these different pills. We've already talked about Rocket's Red Glare being there. He was there until about 5 a.m. His real name is Michael Mora. Now, he mentioned seeing some other regular dealer coming through the lobby when he was leaving. He says his name was Steve something, and from the sounds of it, this Steve Sincotti guy is the one that Victor Colicchio was talking about, where he said his name starts with like an S, like a Skippy or a something something. Made me think about Steve Sincotti. Maybe they called him Stevie, or maybe they called him Sincotti. Especially in New York, I feel like they call a lot of people by their last name. But this guy was already there. He beat Victor to the punch, so Victor wasn't able to sell them anything because they already bought a bunch from this Steve guy. Sid and Nancy had made it very apparent that they were having a party and having people roll through. So there was people from all over the hotel that were rolling through that hotel room that night. But in particular, there was one guy that was focused on more than anybody else in that Who Killed Nancy documentary. And I found it very, very interesting. Probably one of the more likely suspects in this case. Everybody mentions that there was this guy named Michael. Now, I kept thinking that there was two Michaels. Now I'm wondering if these two Michaels, Rocket's Red Glare and this other mysterious Michael, I'm wondering if they might have been the same person, but multiple people recount this Michael guy being in the room.
We know that some people said that some drug dealer from the Chelsea Hotel had been in there at that time. Not Rocket's Red Glare. It was another self-seeking nutso.
Including Steve Dior.
We were having a meal before the gig, and this kid was sitting with Nancy, blonde-haired kid. And I said to Sid, I said, you know, who is that? Sid's like, oh, that's Michael. Nancy really likes him.
One of the makers of that documentary who was making phone calls around, she spoke with this girl who was saying, yeah, that Michael guy was super weird. He gave me the creeps. And she talks about how he lived on the 6th floor of the hotel, and he was an actor, or I guess a wannabe actor, that was living with this group of actors on the 6th floor.
I just said this offhand to this one girl, and she goes, oh my God, I know he didn't. She goes, that Michael guy was crazy. She said that he lived on the 6th floor, and that there was a group of actors that lived up there that partied sometimes with Sid and Nancy and would go down to the 1st floor, and that he was a part of this group of people.
The Chelsea Hotel, like I mentioned before in like episode 1, was a meeting place for lots of people who were trying to break into film, music, all kinds of different industries. But this guy Michael was supposedly friends with Nancy and Sid. Sid didn't really know who he was. He just knew that Nancy liked him and she brought him around occasionally. This guy was very flamboyant and liked the company of people who identify as the same gender as him.
And this guy was, he wore pointy alligator shoes and flamboyant, very gay.
We were kind of young, you know, maybe cute, maybe Nancy was cute. I don't know what kind of relationship they had. Sid didn't really seem to mind at all, so I was like, okay. And apparently he was there the night that she was murdered.
They interview another guy named Ned Van Zant. He was one of these actors who was hanging out with this guy, Michael. He just knows him as M. He says that when they were hanging out, M at some point says, yo, I've got to go down to Sid and Nancy's room. So he rolls with him down there. Once Ned gets to Sid and Nancy's room, he also notes that Sid was passed out, completely out cold, in the bed, face down.
One particular evening, I was hanging out with him. He said, I've got to go down to Sid and Nancy's room. I went in the room with him, and you know, he did his business with them, and I remember that Nancy had a lot of money. I do remember Sid was very fucked up, and I was told it was 2-0. And I was just making heavy barbiturate. And so we left, and him slipped.
Now, the interesting thing I found was that the lady who was making calls to make this documentary, she ended up getting a hold of this girl who said that she knew that Michael guy and that she was upstairs and was there when Michael was there as well. And she recalls the exact same story as what Ned does. Ned says that eventually Michael came back upstairs after being gone for a while, and he came up saying, hey, guess what? Nancy's in a body bag, and Sid killed her. So it's kind of weird that he's announcing it like that, first of all. Second of all, Ned mentions that he had this big smile on his face, and he said that he's not a guy that typically smiles like that.
Michael had come upstairs after this had happened sometime early in the morning.
Big smile on his face. I'd never seen him smile before. And he said, guess what? Nancy's in a body bag. Sid killed her.
To everyone in the room, when he said that Sid had killed her, that no one believed him, and that he had shown up with all of this cash tied up with Nancy's purple hair tie. And they all identified this guy to the police, supposedly, which is why I always thought that if someone got a hold of the police files, that his name would be in there.
Now, Neon Leon also recalls that when Nancy called him asking if he had any of the devil's lettuce, he heard a male voice in the background. He had no idea who it was, and he assumes it wasn't Sid because it didn't sound like Sid, and he knew that he was passed out. So originally I was like, okay, well, Michael, this guy's name is Michael, Rocket's Red Glare's name is Michael. It's probably just the same guy, and all of these different people don't know his name versus his nickname, or that was where my head was at. But then I found some news reports where they spoke with the hotel staff, as well as some of the people who lived in the hotel. And one of those people they spoke with, they said was wearing a checkered shirt and cowboy boots and refused to give their name. But all of the things that this person says make it seem like they're trying to push the narrative that Sid and Nancy were both unstable. They were both whacked out of their mind on drugs, and it was only a matter of time before this happened. In fact, he even goes as far as to say that he saw Sid putting this knife up to Nancy's neck sometime in the past week. On top of everybody else who's seen this Michael guy there, Reverend Victor Colicchio also sees Michael in the hotel room that night. And even further than that, Ned Van Zant talks about how he was wearing these alligator cowboy boots. So not only was I able to prove from this secondary account from the hotel staff in this news article that this Michael guy definitely did exist. And he was super sketched out about giving his name to anybody, so he just went as unnamed resident. But he definitely exists. The other piece that was convincing for me is that Steve Dior, he actually was so convinced that this Michael guy was the culprit that he sketched out a drawing of what he thought this guy looked like from memory, and he literally hangs on to this thing because he truly believes that this was the guy responsible for what happened to Nancy.
They closed the book, I think, because nothing ever came out about it, because nothing ever came out about this guy Michael and who he was. But I do have a drawing I did of this guy. I drew a picture of him from memory, because I've never seen it documented. But I did a sketch of what I believe this guy, what I remember him looking like. This is the guy that I think did it. Michael.
Unfortunately, this Michael guy is a ghost. Nobody knows his last name, nobody really knows who he is, and he disappeared after all of this very conveniently. The part that makes everybody really question whether Sid did this or not is the fact that they had just been paid $28,000 from Sid's hard work that he'd done with his solo career, and they were showing this money, flashing it around all night. Nancy was just being sloppy and messy, dropping 50s and 100s all over the place, and they just had stacks of cash, mostly just sitting out. Sid recalls that he had most of his cash in one of the drawers in the hotel room, and the next morning, when he woke up and was kind of coherent and was going to the methadone clinic, he checked that drawer and he said the money was all gone.
What did he tell you?
He told me that he saw the drawer where they kept their money was open and it was missing. And then he went into the bathroom and she was under the sink. And she was all bloody.
Somebody came in the room, stabbed Nancy, took the money and left.
That seemed like a pretty normal story to me. You know, that if you knew Nancy, if she caught someone robbing the money, she would attack.
Right after this thing happened, everybody in New York was suspicious because the stories came out that no money was found in the room. And people who had been at the party saw her flashing a lot of money around.
Whatever else happened in room 100 that night, are we also supposed to believe that all this money simply vanished? Yet during the night, the room had been accessed by drug dealers, junkies, band members, and by NYPD.
The NYPD had no clue there was any missing money. It's only when various witnesses started giving their statements and talking about Nancy dropping $100 bills in the corridor of the Chelsea.
So this missing money, this missing 28 G's, is definitely reason to suspect that somebody might have done something to get that 28 G's. So the speculation is that this Michael guy saw the amount of cash that was available down there. He knew that Sid was already passed out because he literally just went down there to sell them some Tuinol pills, went back upstairs, then disappeared for a few hours, only to reappear saying that, oh, Nancy's gone and Sid definitely did it, which is very strange. The other thing I thought about is the fact that this other outside of the hotel caller who somehow has this knowledge about what's going on in room 100, but the way that they say it, there's trouble in room 100. Like, that's what you would do if you wanted to make an anonymous call, but you were the guy that killed that person and were just like, there's trouble in room 100, better go check it out. Click. Sounded very much like a Michael kind of a move.
Criminals always return to the scene of the crime.
Now, I was fully convinced that these were two separate Michaels. Michael Mora and this other mystery Michael. The further I dug into it, the more I was questioning it, because I found an interview with Rocket's Red Glare, aka Michael Mora, where he talks about how if he was just some regular straight guy, hinting to the fact that he bats for the opposite team. That was already one clue saying that they might be the same person. The other clue was the fact that Michael Mora goes on to try and become an actor.
She said that he lived on the 6th floor and that there was a group of actors that lived up there that partied sometimes with Sid and Nancy and would go down to the 1st floor, and that he was a part of this group of people.
He starts doing stand-up comedy, and then in 1983, he's actually picked up to star in some movies in like smaller roles. But he would go on to be in multiple different big films, including the movie Big with Tom Hanks. Now, a lot of you guys have been with me for a while, and you know that we see weird deep state stuff going on in the music and film industries all the time. There's all these weird secret societies and just weird stuff happening behind the scenes. So my mind immediately went to maybe Rocket's Red Glare made some sort of deal with the devil, and he was tasked with taking out Nancy Spungen. Now, why would he want to do this? First of all, there's $28K sitting in a drawer in this hotel room that could be all his. Second of all, he may have been hired by Virgin Records because Virgin Records had just recently signed Sid Vicious. They must have realized how truly detrimental Nancy was to his success, and maybe they wanted her out of the way. So it's possible that this Rocket's Red Glare guy was hired so that he could go in, take her out, get taken care of by the music industry, and then somehow be gifted an acting career. Because suddenly he goes from being a stand-up comedian to being an actor in a very short amount of time. But the fact that Rocket's Red Glare is an actor is yet again another parallel between him and this Mystery Michael. The only thing that still is kind of puzzling me is that Rocket's Red Glare was never known to have lived in the Chelsea Hotel. And yet everybody says that this Michael character, Mystery Michael, lived on the 6th floor of the hotel. So that is the only piece that I couldn't really line up. But besides that, I kept finding parallels between Rocket's Red Glare and Mystery Michael, making me think that they actually might have been the same person. Especially since Rocket's Red Glare was there from like 3 a.m. until about 5 a.m., which was a really busy time period for the hotel room. Tons of people going in and out during that time frame. Rocket's Red Glare is also a huge addict.
And finally, I just said this offhand to this one girl, and she goes, "Oh my God, I know he didn't." She goes, "That Michael guy was crazy." And I said, "Your boyfriend lived at the Chelsea in 1978? She said, "Yeah." And I said, "What, was he a junkie?" And she goes, "Oh yeah."
He was a bouncer at a local bar, and he was also a dealer. So the guy had connections. The guy was obviously big, and he was able to take care of himself, fight if he needed to. So it just makes you wonder if he tried to overpower Nancy in that hotel room, if maybe he was hired in order to do this. We really don't know, but it is very interesting. I want you guys to drop it in the comments whether you think that Rocket's Red Glare and Mystery Michael are the same person or two different people. But that's not all I found with our good buddy Rockets. I was looking through his IMDb just to get an idea of like what movies he was in besides Big and some of these other smaller roles. And the guy was in the movie Basquiat. If you guys recall from my Twitch episode, Jean-Michel Basquiat was a really renowned kind of street graffiti artist in the 70s. And Rocket's Red Glare was in this movie playing himself because he was not only a dealer to Sid Vicious, he was also a regular dealer to Basquiat. Tell me that's not weird. Oh, and just in case you were unaware, Basquiat passed away and joined the 27 Club in 1988 from an accidental overdose. Tell me that's not interesting. And if you're curious because you have no idea what I'm talking about, then go watch my Did Twitch Snitch episode, and you will get more of a full understanding of Basquiat and why that's interesting. What makes Rockets even more interesting is that he is the #1 suspect in the book Pretty Vacant, A History of Punk by Phil Strongman. He says that he has, without a doubt, no question, that Rockets was responsible for what happened to Nancy. One of the main reasons he feels that way is because Rockets is known to have admitted that he did it to his circle of friends. He denied it to the press and any mainstream media, but he had admitted it on multiple occasions to different friends, and even said he was going to include it in his book.
Told me I'm writing a book and there's going to be some very interesting facts that are going to come out. And I kind of had a feeling I knew what he was heading, where he was going with this. And I let him go, and he's saying, I did it. And I didn't really have to say, what did you do, Rockets? It was talking about, the book, and he was going to let people know that he was the man.
And I mean, $28,000 is very motivating, as is the prospect of making connections within Hollywood. But why on earth would Virgin Records get involved in something like this? Well, I was looking more into Virgin Records. I'm not sure how many of you guys know this, but Richard Branson is the owner, founder, and CEO of Virgin Records. Now, Richard Branson is not only in the Epstein files, he's not only on the Epstein flight logs, but he is also supposedly on some of these sex tapes that Epstein kept in his vault that the FBI drilled out when he got arrested. So there's a high likelihood that he was definitely in cahoots with Epstein, and he's also friends with Prince Andrew. He's friends with many other very powerful figures in the world. One of the other interesting things about Sir Richard Branson is that he has personally endorsed Keith Rainier's empowerment group, the Ethical Humanitarian Foundation. He also has hosted multiple different events and seminars on his private island that were attended by known NXIVM sex cult members. So, of course, Sir Richard Branson says he doesn't even know who Keith Rainier is. He's never heard of him before. He has no ties to NXIVM. He has no idea why anybody would think that he's tied with this cult. And yet there's all these pictures of him with members of this cult. I don't know, man. Make it make sense. So it just kind of makes you wonder. At that point in time, Virgin Records was still fairly new. It was founded in 1972. But in 1978, trying to make or break this business, they had just signed Sid Vicious, which they thought was going to be a huge break for them with the mass and popularity around Sid. So it kind of tracks that they might want to get rid of Nancy to try and make Sid more profitable. Plus, think of all the media attention that this got. Sid is now an accused killer, and Nancy's gone. And to make things even worse, Malcolm McLaren comes out with a t-shirt that says, "She's dead, I'm alive, I'm yours." Trying to sell these shirts and capitalize on this awful, tragic situation. Further implicating Virgin Records, though, they come out with this doll. It's a Sid Vicious doll. They're selling t-shirts, they're selling dolls. They're trying to capitalize every which way they possibly can in order to profit off of this situation. While the spotlight is on Sid, let's make as much money as we can off of this. Now, there was multiple reports saying that Malcolm was the one that bailed Sid out of jail. There was other reports saying that there was a secret donor who bailed Sid out of jail, and that would have been Mick Jagger. Now, I've heard a couple of different people say that it was in fact Mick Jagger that did this. I don't know what the actual truth is, but somebody posted Sid's bail, and he was out. Now, according to Stiv Bators, Sid could have just gone in the next day, done a blood test, and then been cleared of this whole situation, because the police found 2 different blood types on Nancy's knife. One was Nancy's, the other was an unidentified person, but it was not Sid's.
Finally, in the case, they found on Nancy's knife, there was 2 different blood types, and one didn't match Sid's. So they let him go that night. Also, her knife had the thong in it. If Sid was going to kill her, he'd do it with his own knife.
Yeah, right.
So it was obviously Nancy's. And so when the cops let him go, all he had to do is show up the next morning and do a blood test, and he wouldn't have been the prime suspect.
One of the other things that was really interesting that they found as evidence was there was 6 sets of fingerprints in this hotel room, which isn't really surprising because there was tons of people going in and out of that hotel room all night. The thing that is surprising is that all 6 of those names have been redacted in the police report. None of those guys were ever questioned, and you'd have to imagine if they had 6 sets of fingerprints and they had 6 names, that means those people were already in the database as criminals. They'd done something in the past that they were now in the CODIS database of fingerprints. I'm almost willing to guarantee Michael Mora and maybe this mystery Michael, if they are in fact 2 separate people, were on that list. One of the other theories that I thought was pretty interesting, which is why I started this whole episode off with the whole Romeo and Juliet thing, is that maybe Nancy did this to herself. She had already told everybody, including her mom and Sid, that she wasn't going to live past 21. She said that she already feels like an old lady, and she had been planning on not living to 21 for a long time now.
And what do you think made it happen?
It was meant to happen. Nancy always said she'd die before she was 21.
According to some people, her and Sid had a death pact.
I was walking on 23rd Street. I saw Sid. He started yelling my name. You know, Gino, what's going on? Come here. I'm like, yo, Sid, what's up? So he comes over to me. We started bullshit. He's telling me he's got trouble with Nancy. I was like, what? What's going on? What do you mean trouble with Nancy? He's like, Nancy wants me to kill myself. Kill yourself? What are you talking about, man? You're doing fucking great. No, she's serious, man. She wants us both to kill ourselves. Kill yourselves? Come on, man. You're fucking crazy. I'm like, come on. Stop this bullshit. Well, he's like, well, I don't know, man. You know, but I ain't going through with it. I'm telling her, yeah, I'm gonna do it. But I ain't doing shit. She's nuts, you know what I'm saying to you? I'll play her game, but I can't take this bullshit with her, you know?
One of the things that made me think this might have been the case is Neon Leon saying that Sid and Nancy came over, and when he came over, he brought 2 gold records and his super iconic leather jacket. Why would he bring those things over if he wasn't planning on going away? So that did lend some credibility to that fact, as well as some other stuff that we'll talk about here in just a little bit. I'd say probably the biggest piece for most people, though, is the fact that Nancy did not try and summon anybody. She didn't try and get help. She didn't yell, try and get anybody to come save her. It's almost like she wanted this to happen. She clearly made it from the bed to the bathroom, so she had to walk somewhere. The reason that she passed was because she hemorrhaged and bled out, and they say that it probably happened over the course of about 2.5 hours. So she had 2 to 2.5 hours to try and find some help, get to the phone, call the front desk, yell and scream for anybody to help her. And clearly those walls are paper thin because the neighbor in 102, Vera, she heard that moaning happening. And if you could hear moaning, you could definitely hear screaming or someone calling for help.
While the cops zeroed in on Sid, things weren't adding up for the people who knew him.
I just never had that feeling, you know.
Why not?
The neighbor didn't hear, you know, an argument or anything. If he would have killed her, the whole hotel would have heard it, you know, because they did have some fights you can hear.
I think she might have stabbed herself and think Sid would have come to her rescue, and Sid didn't get up. He was passed out. But she was probably very, very high herself.
So if Nancy's not calling for help, why? Maybe because she's Juliet, and she took that dagger and went right into her stomach. Once Sid gets released from jail, posting bail.
The whole thing lasted no more than 3 minutes, and out they went. Vicious made no attempt at ducking cameras waiting outside the courtroom, but he refused to respond to any of the reporters' questions and shoved persistent microphones out of his path. The grand jury will decide whether or not to indict Vicious for murder. If he is indicted, the case moves to the Supreme Court for further action. Vicious was ordered to Rikers Island. If convicted of the stabbing death of Miss Spungen, Vicious faces 15 years to life.
He is just spiraling even harder than before. He's traumatized, he's missing his true love, and he doesn't really know what to do with his life. He doesn't want to be around anymore. He tries to self-exit 2 different times. One of the times he tried to do this, he was using a broken light bulb. One of the most heartbreaking parts about this whole situation is that Sid ends up writing Deborah Spungen 2 letters. And in these letters, he essentially just tells her like he would never do this. He loved Nancy so much, and he really doesn't know who else to turn to because he feels like Deborah is really the only person that he can trust or turn to at this point. And one of the other things he says to her that I thought was really powerful is that the only other person who knows what it's like to love Nancy the way that he did would be Nancy's mom. And I was trying to think of what he could possibly have meant by this. And ultimately, I think he was just saying, like, you know how difficult and unique and challenging Nancy can be to love, and yet you love her unconditionally, without question, and would do anything for her. And Sid likely felt exactly the same way. He loved Nancy despite all of her flaws, despite all of the toxicity between them. He truly loved this girl. And the only other person in the world who loved her like he did was her mom. So he was reaching out to her, trying to bond with her, just trying to find some sort of comfort in this world. And it's kind of crazy because Sid is the person who is accused of doing this to Nancy. And yet here he is reaching out to Deborah. But Sid was continuing to spiral, and his freedom would not last very long, because shortly after he got bailed out, he was at a Skafish or a Skafish show, and he was kind of flirting with the drummer. Her name was Tara. Tara was actually dating Todd Smith, who was Patti Smith's brother, and he said something to Sid. He's like, yo, back up off. And Sid then proceeded to smash a glass bottle over his head, cutting his face really badly, and he kicked him in the nuts. This obviously violates his conditions of being released, so he's arrested and taken back to Rikers Island. Unfortunately, Sid had been spiraling at this point, doing tons of drugs, so he was thrown into Rikers and had to basically withdraw cold turkey, which is really rough. I've never been through it personally, but I've talked to people who have been through it. I've been in recovery groups and heard about it. It sounds truly awful. And on top of that, jail is already super cold and uncomfortable. So going through that in such a terrible situation, in a terrible place, I couldn't even imagine how awful that was. On top of that, it said that he got physically and sexually assaulted multiple times while he was at Rikers Island. After spending 55 days in Rikers Island, completely detoxing, Sid is sober at this point. He finally makes bail again. I don't know how they're going to continuously let him out on bail when he's now been convicted of 2 crimes. Plus, he's from England. He's an alien technically, so the flight risk is pretty high. But they do. And it makes me wonder if maybe Virgin Record pulled some strings, because guess who bailed Sid out the second time? That's right, Virgin Records. They spent $50,000 to bail Sid out. Seems to me like they have some sort of vested interest in Sid Vicious. It also seems to me that they were able to pull some strings in order to get him released. Otherwise, I couldn't imagine them releasing him under normal circumstances. Now, one of the theories that one of the guys from my work brought up, and he was actually a former corrections officer at Rikers Island. He knows the ins and outs. He knows how awful that place is and how poorly they treat the inmates. Sid might have gotten so bad with his withdrawals, he doesn't even think that Sid made it out of that place alive. He thinks that they gave him over as just a body to his mom and Beverly. So I don't know, it's definitely a possibility. Very interesting theory. But Sid was turned over to his mom and Beverly, which is like, what? Where did Anne come from? She's literally neglected Sid his entire life, and suddenly she wants to be there for him, pick him up from jail, and then even further than that, she wants to throw Sid this huge party. A Sid got released from jail party again. Party. Nancy's passing left a massive hole in Sid's life. Pretty huge void to fill. But in order to try and fill it, Sid did move on fairly quickly. He started dating a mutual friend of him and Nancy's named Michelle Robinson, and the two of them had a pretty casual relationship, and essentially it seemed like it was revolving around doing drugs. But when Sid gets released, his mom picks him up, they head over to Michelle's apartment, which is where they're going to throw this party for Sid. Of course, the first thing Sid wants to do is get high. Sid asks his mom if she can go pick up something for him, and so she's like, yes, I absolutely can. What are good mothers for? So she goes out, she scores for Sid, she comes back, and of course Sid uses it, but he says it's super weak, especially considering the fact that he just detoxed for 55 days. His tolerance is super low. I'm sure it was actually weak if he was saying that. And maybe that was her plan, was to get him to do some weak stuff so that he inevitably would want to get some stronger stuff. Or maybe she was just trying to be careful because he did get sober, so she didn't want to overdo it. But Sid is pissed. He's like, hey, can you please get me something stronger than this? This stuff sucks. So Sid's mom hits up Sid's friend Peter Gravel and says, hey, I've got this connection. I need you to go meet him up, grab this stuff, and come back. Peter describes his experience meeting this mystery dealer, and he says that he tried to find this dealer again after everything happened, and they just disappeared. They were a ghost. And he also has no idea who this person was, because it was Anne Beverly who found this dealer. Also, Anne doesn't live in the United States. How did she find this dealer either? But Peter grabs this stuff. The dealer says, be careful, this stuff is super pure. I've heard two different things. I've heard it was 98% pure, but that's pretty crazy high. I've also heard that it was 80% pure, which sounds more reasonable because most black tar is typically only about 40 to 50% pure. So 80% is going to be really strong. Other people that were there at the party remember doing this. In fact, one of Sid's friends actually has a story about how he himself OD'd on this same batch.
And that's when Peter was dispatched by Anne with Anne's money to go and get some more drugs for Sid.
Somehow I got in touch with this woman who I didn't know at all, and somebody had given me her as a contact. I went down to see her, and I got what I'd been asked to pick up.
The things, what did come back with Peter was beyond good. It was, I think it's been said it was 98% proof or something, which is too pure for the human body in any state, basically.
About two days later, I tried to get in touch with this woman again, and this woman had disappeared. She was no longer at the place where I'd met her, at the apartment I'd met her, and was nowhere to be found, really. I never saw her again.
Another distinction you have is being the other person who did the same stuff the night that he OD'd.
Yeah, that's true. And
Did that come from a regular?
I OD'd that night also.
Did that come from your regular dealer?
No, it was a friend of ours that flew in from England. As soon as I shot this dope, man, it was fucking strong. I knew it as soon as I shot it. I walked out of the bathroom. I said, I think this is it, And Sheila just said, I heard Sheila going, don't die in my apartment. I said, shut the fuck up. And then next thing I knew was 4 hours later.
But regardless, Sid takes some, and inevitably he ODs. His mom is able to bring him back, but then he ends up asking for more. And unfortunately, he ODs again. At this point, everybody's like, no, we got to cut him off. Peter tells Sid there's nothing left when he asks for another one. But Peter gives the rest of what they had to Sid's mom and says, here, don't give him any more tonight. He doesn't need any more. It's just going to end badly. Save this for tomorrow. Peter decides that he's going to take off. And then some point in the evening, Sid takes some Tuinal pills. And we're not 100% sure exactly what happened after this, which adds another layer of controversy to this whole case. In the early morning of February 2nd, 1979, Sid Vicious is found unresponsive in that apartment. Unfortunately, he OD'd.
Now the news. Sid Vicious will not have to stand trial for the murder of a girlfriend at the Chelsea Hotel. Sid is no longer vicious, he's dead. His nude body found in a Greenwich Village apartment, spoon and syringe nearby.
One thing I found very strange in this case, as well as so many other cases we talk about, was the fact that Sid was found completely naked. Why are all these people dying completely naked? Now, there's a lot of speculation here. There's quite a few people out there that believe that Sid's mom hot-shotted Sid. There's also people who say that a common way to hot-shot somebody is to find someone who has extra pure stuff and not really tell them how pure it is. And because of this whole mystery dealer, it seems pretty suspicious. Like maybe Sid's mom was trying to get some extremely strong stuff because she knows exactly how deep of a hole he is in right now. Also, Sid's mom is an addict, so maybe she was paid off by Virgin Records. Why else would she be out here from the UK randomly to pick up Sid and take care of him? And then this random mystery dealer, maybe she was a plant from Virgin Records. Very interesting. There's money in it for Virgin, and there's money in it for Anne. And there's one thing I know about addicts, and that's that they always need money. She also sees how amazingly depressed and sad and just broken Sid is at this point. And she knows that even if he gets through this, he still has to go through a murder trial. He still lost the love of his life. He still has this terrible addiction issue. Things are just not looking good for him. So it almost makes you wonder if Anne was just trying to do what she considered to be the kind thing, just let him go out peacefully. But one of the things that really solidified that theory for me is that Anne finds this quote-unquote self-exit note that Sid quote-unquote left. The note is ripped in half, and essentially it just says, I can't go on like this. I miss my baby too much. I can't live without Nancy. Please bury me in my leather jacket, which apparently I gave to Neon Leon. What? And my boots. And please bury me next to Nancy. Now, I was trying to figure out if this was an authentic note. In order to do that, I did a whole lot of handwriting comparison with my Kurt Cobain series. So I was like, well, let's see if we can find some writing by Sid Vicious that we can compare to this note to see how similar they are. And I found this other note that Sid wrote about how he loves Nancy and all the different reasons and things he loves about her. And if you compare this note to the other note, this self-exit note, they don't look at all the same, like not even a little bit, in my opinion. Not at all. And if you ask me, Sid's handwriting is way too clean and way too readable for somebody who just OD'd twice in one night. On one hand, I'm like, what the F, Mom? But on another hand, I'm like, honestly, it makes the most sense because Sid really is in a really terrible situation. Maybe this was her way of ending her son's suffering. But who killed Nancy? Well, now that Sid's dead, nobody cares. Case closed. It was Sid. Couple of junkies. They're both gone. Nobody cares, right? This is what reminds me so much of the Kurt Cobain case. The cops seem like they have this single track mindset. They go in, they think they already know what happened, so they don't waste any time exploring any other possibilities to find out what actually happened. They just go with whatever the easiest answer is, the least amount of paperwork. Let's just close this case up. Why pursue it anyways? This guy who would have been on trial, he's gone now. Who cares? So yet again, a terrible investigation by the police department leaves us with more questions than answers. The other thing that this note says is that Sid and Nancy had some sort of agreement, some sort of pact, and in order to fulfill his end of the agreement, his side of the pact, he had to do this. There's a lot of evidence to kind of back this up, including multiple self-exit attempts after being released from jail. But now this note, as well as friends who had talked about this pact that they had made even before either one of them passed. So I don't know, you guys, a lot to consider, a lot of information, all very suspicious. But I want to know what you guys think. Did Sid kill Nancy? And did Sid take his own life? Was there a pact between the two of them? Or did Anne Beverly do what she thought was the most humane thing to do and allow her son to go out in this blaze of glory just like he did? And more than anything, I want to know what you guys think about Virgin Records. What was their role in all of this? Because I guarantee that they profited pretty heavily from the song My Way that they signed. Sid Sings, I'm sure, was selling really well after he passed. Pretty much anybody who was involved with the Sex Pistols likely benefited as well, because I'm sure Sex Pistols sales went way up. So it's just one of those things that you have to ask yourself, who benefited from this? Could they possibly have been involved? Whew. So I don't know, you guys. That is 3 episodes worth of Sid and Nancy. This case was, yet again, way more interesting than I had originally anticipated. This was one of the first cases when I was thinking about doing my Sobering Stories, podcast series or whatever. I was looking into crime stories that also had to do with addiction, and Sid and Nancy popped up time and time again. And so I had originally planned to do that one fairly early on, but the evolution of the channel guided me elsewhere. So I'm glad that I was able to make it back to this story. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the story. Definitely let me know what you think in the comments. But that's all I got for you guys this week. I look forward to doing this again with you guys next week for another one. But until then, oh happy dagger, this is thy sheath, there rust, and let me die. Sleep safe, stay sober. Later, sobers.
Kills them all, And this Nancy taught him all of this, and he was too young and dumb to know any different. And the biggest joke of all was Sid would never have hooked up with a girl like Nancy unless I introduced her to him. Which I did. And so I take some really serious sense of responsibility in Sid's demise because of that. All right? I miss my friends.
Let's go.